Hey students, we're super close to the AP exam, and I just wanted to go over the exam questions, the FRQ questions from last year one more time, and explain how I would answer them so that you can, of course, not copy my answers since your code is going to be a little bit different, but I think it'll be helpful enough so that you see the structure and that you see what is important to consider for those questions. So let's get into it. Just as a reminder, I'm going to be answering those for my app here. And, oh, I didn't want to do that. Yes, there we go. I'm going to be answering them here for my app. So just so you remember what my app does, it's the dog app where you can select a breed group here, like toy, working, terrier. I know I was too lazy to add the other groups. And then when you press the random button, you see a random dog breed with the name of the breed and a picture. All right, and I created here this reference sheet as you would see it also on the exam. So let's do the first question of the exam of 24 and question set 1. So for the first one, they're asking you to describe at least one valid input to your program and what your program does with the input. So this is two parts that you have to do. One valid input, and then what does your program do with it? And with the valid input, what they mean is really specific to your app. What would you do here, and how would you input anything so that you get your app to do something? In my case, the input would be choosing a breed group here in the dropdown and then pressing the button, clicking onto the button. This would be an input. So first part here, one valid input would be clicking the drop-down menu and clicking onto terrier to select it. Then clicking the random button. This would be the input. So we're done with part 1 here of the question. Now for part 2, what your program does with that input. So a whole bunch of things are going on when we click the button, and you can use your reference sheets on the exam. What happens if the user clicks the button after selecting a value in the dropdown? This event gets triggered. So we get the event from pressing the pick button here triggered. And this event, again, will call the filter and select procedure using whatever was selected here in the dropdown. The important thing is they really want to see in the answer what happens to your input. So here, the first time the input is used is it's retrieved here from your dropdown and put into the filter and select procedure as an argument. And then in here, we have the filtered lists. We go over all of the values in our original lists and we filter them for this breed group that you selected in the dropdown that gets passed here as an argument. And at the end, we choose a random index in our filtered lists and show that to the user. So here in text, how would I answer this? Clicking the button will trigger my pick button event. The event calls the filter and select function or procedure with values selected by the user in the dropdown. So in our example, you can state this again. Terrier would be pressed. Since we said we would select here terrier as input, what would be passed as value for the breed group parameter. Now the function will filter my lists. This would be the name list and the breed group and the image list. All of these lists here will be filtered for what I selected as the breed group. So again, I selected terrier in our example. And after filtering, one random index is chosen for the filtered lists. The dog breed and the dog image at the index in the filtered lists are shown to the user. So that's it. That's how you can answer this question. This is probably a bit more detailed than what most of you would answer, at least from what I saw in class. You guys answered this a little bit shorter, but keep in mind you have 1 hour to answer 4 questions, probably, at least that's what it was last year. So make sure to take the time and to explain the full process and explain what happens with your input. So you need to explain what happens with terrier in my case, the input from the dropdown, and what happens with the button click. this is what I tried to do here in this answer, explaining how these values get passed on and how the button triggers the event so that the user eventually sees an output. Yeah, make sure to include all of these aspects. All right, on to the next question. So here we are asked, consider the first iteration statement included in your program code. Describe what is being accomplished by the code in the body of the iteration statement. So first of all, let's locate the right code here. We are being asked about the first iteration statement. That would be the first for loop here. So it's line 14 to line 20. And we are asked to describe what is being accomplished by the code in the body of the iteration statement. So the body of the iteration statement would be 15 to 19, to 19, everything inside of the if statement. And we are asked here what is accomplished by this. And if you answer, first of all, try to identify what code you're talking about. So here I'm first stating my first iteration statement is this for loop, and then I just copy what it said here. And then I actually explain what it does. So the iteration statement, it iterates over name list and it checks if the value in breed group list at each index matches breed group which was specified as the argument. And if it matches, this breed will be added to the filtered lists. So let's see it in the code. We iterate over the length of the name list here. So we iterate over the list here and we check if breed group list of I matches the breed group selection here, which was passed on as an argument to this procedure. And then we add, if there's a match, if the breed group argument matches the actual breed group in the list, then we add all of the values at position I in those different lists here to the filtered lists. I answered this quite shortly here. You could also explain this a little bit more in detail, but I think this would probably be sufficient here. But again, since you have a lot of time on the exam, there's nothing wrong in making use of the time and explaining all the details. Don't explain something off topic, but you can explain that we go over all of the indices from 0 to whatever the length is of the list, or -1 if we're talking inclusive here, and then we check for each index if the breed group list value matches the breed group argument, and if that is so, we add all of those values in name list, breed group list, and the image list to the filtered lists. All right, that's it for question 2. Let's continue on to the third question here, procedure call testing. So here, consider the first student-developed procedure in your program code. Write 2 calls to your procedure that each cause a different code segment in the procedure to execute. Describe the expected behavior of each call. So let's do it up until here. Write 2 calls to your procedure that cause a different code segment in your procedure to execute. First of all, writing calls to your procedure. Remember, you use your procedure name. For me, it would be filter and select, and you provide 1 argument. You might have a procedure with more arguments, then you have to provide more arguments separated by commas. In my case, I put the name, then I put brackets, and in here, this is the important thing, write 2 calls to your procedure. Usually you're supposed to put in values here. So in most of the questions, don't put in a variable. If they actually want you to do something very concrete, then you are probably supposed to put a value in here. So that is probably very likely with the code I've seen from all of you, a string. So you need the quotation marks here, or it's a number, then it's just the plain number. Maybe it's true or false, but I haven't seen that much. So most likely it's gonna be a string here, but check in your code what type it is that you need and make sure you put in a value and not a variable. All right, so this is the first thing, write 2 calls to your procedure, and each of them should execute a different code segment. Let's check out my code. So we can see if breed group matches breed group list of I, then we get this part, line 16 to 18, the body of the conditional statement here, to execute. If they don't match, it doesn't execute. So this is the only thing I can control with the input here, in terms of which code gets executed and which code doesn't get executed. So what I can do, what I tried here in my answer, is I put in one value toy for the toy breed group, which exists, and I put in one value apple, which has nothing to do with my data. So for toy, this if statement here, the body will be executed a couple of times because we're going to get matches here where the if statement is true. But for apple, since there's no dog breed groups that are called apple, this code segment will never execute. And this is the whole trick for the answer. In the one case, we get this part of the code to execute. In the other case, it does not execute. So let's check out the answer here I gave. The first one is a valid breed group and will cause the body of the iteration statement or conditional statement to execute. The second one is not a valid breed group, so the condition of the if statement is never true and the body of the if statement never gets executed. So again here, because apple would not be valid, we would not execute this code. And then this is important, they wanted two different code segments to execute. I can only kind of toggle whether the body of the if statement gets executed or not with my input, but there's no other if statements or no other else statements in here. So there's no other code part that I can get to execute or I cannot get to execute. So that's what I'm saying here. It is not possible to get any other parts of the code to execute in the procedure because there is no other if or else statement. This is basically all the control I have using the parameter. Maybe some of you might have another if statement where they check if the filtered lists have a length of 0 or where you do something completely different. If this is the case, then try to trigger another part of the code also. As I said, I can only make that execute or make it not execute. I don't have other options for my answer, but you might depending on what you're doing. Let's move on to the last question here. So suppose another programmer provides you with a procedure called check validity that returns true if a value passed as an argument is considered valid by the other programmer and returns false otherwise. Using the first list identified in your program code, explain in detailed steps an algorithm that uses check validity to check whether all elements in your list are considered valid by the other programmer. So the first thing here, you are given a procedure. So whether something is valid or not, you don't have to understand what it means to be valid. They just tell you. So you're supposed to use this procedure of someone else to figure out whether something is valid or not. And here in this case, what we need to do is check for our first list in the program. So we can check out our code, and the first list here we have is the name list. So I'm gonna be referring to the name list. Other than that, it's not connected to your code. It's really just asking you to use one of your lists. So just check if they say something like this, what list are they referring to, and then use this. And now the way they define it is if all elements are considered valid, then we're supposed to state all of them are valid. But if one or more are not valid, then we're supposed to state not all elements are valid. So it's those two options. Either all of them are valid or not. It's these two options. And now how can we do this in code? We need to iterate over the whole list. So in AP pseudocode, how would we write this? We would use a for each value in our name list. So this iterates over all of the values in the name list. We're not using an index now, we're just getting the value directly in the pseudocode at least. You could also do it with an index, but then it would look different. And here we can now check if the validity of this list value is true or false. So it's really important that you call check validity. You cannot know any other way if it's valid or not because they don't tell you the criteria. They want you to use this check validity procedure to figure it out. And we know if we find at least one value that is not valid, then our answer has to be not all values are valid. So that's why I'm checking here if I find one that is not valid. That's why I put this not here in front, because if I find one, I can stop. I know the answer. So if I find one where this if statement becomes true, then we're going to return false. And returning false in this case is supposed to mean not all values are valid. On the other hand, if we reach the end of the for loop, then we know we've seen all of them and we've never stopped here for the if statement. We've never returned false because, again, return false means we terminate the procedure. So once we find one where we return false, then we're done. We don't continue executing the code. But if this is not the case, if we've never found one that was not valid, then we know we've seen all of them now after the for loop is done, and all of them must be valid because we've reached the end. And that means now we can return true because we've seen all of them and all of them have been valid by the check validity procedure. And yeah, that's the answer. I wrote this here in pseudocode. Writing it in pseudocode or in any code is of course harder than describing it in words, or it can be for a lot of people. So feel free to just answer this completely with words by describing. This is completely fine. Just make sure to get the terminology right. So what do? We loop over all values in namelist. For each value, we call check validity value to check if it's valid. If check validity returns false, we found an invalid value. We return false, this means not all values are valid, and we finish. If this doesn't happen, after completing the loop without check validity returning false, we can return true because all values have been valid. That's it. So this way you can describe the same thing here in words. You don't have to write the pseudocode, but try to use correct terms and try to make this call here to the procedure. If they tell you to make a call to the procedure, you cannot just say we check if it's valid. No, you have to make a call to the check validity procedure. This is the main thing here. If they tell you make a call, then guys, make this call. Don't just say in words we check if it's valid. That's not what they want. They want you to actually call your procedure. So here, call the procedure, say we call check validity. Same thing up here. If they tell you to call your own procedure, then do it. Write down the name, write down the brackets, and put in an argument or several arguments depending on your procedure. All right, that's it for question set 1. I hope this helps.